It all starts now. Hey gang, this is Nick Z from the 4019s. Welcome to Rock Talk, episode 8. I have a very special guest for you today. He's an incredible actor. You've seen him on TV and on film. His resume is just fantastic. He continues to bring it. Please welcome Reed Diamond. Hey Reed, welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging out with me. I appreciate it.
Oh man, I'm so happy to be here. I've been really looking forward to it.
Thanks. One of the things I like to do, obviously you've seen the show, is
Sure, yeah.
Years ago, we worked on a show together. You were in Dollhouse and Franklin and Bash.
Exactly. How many did you do? All the seasons of Franklin and Bash?
No, I did 2, maybe 1 or 2.
Okay, yeah.
So then we got to chat a little about music. So that was always super fun for me.
Super fun.
Yeah.
I love to talk about music, and here we are talking about music.
You remember when you were a kid and you see your parents' their record collection or and those little things always stick with you throughout your life, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So when you were growing up, now what type of music do you remember early on that got you aware of music? Do you remember?
I mean, it's funny because I think about it all the time. I remember my dad had an amazing LP collection, right? But he was mostly listening to, and music was always playing in the house. So he was mostly listening to Broadway musicals and standard stuff. My mom had all of her Frank Sinatra records that she collected when she was a teenager. So there was always Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett playing. And my dad had every Broadway musical cast album I think that existed, and a lot of classical stuff. And but then he had the pop albums. I remember because I have them. I got them from him. He had two Beatles albums. He had Sgt. Pepper's and at Abbey Road.
Wow.
And I think and that was pretty much how deep his collection went. But of course, I remember for me the gateway band was the Beatles.
Sure.
So because I remember being 9. And listening to Sgt. Pepper's, and then getting that compilation, the Red album, right? The 66,
sure.
with all those hits, and I was in. And so then the Beatles were sort of my gateway, and I remember forming my first band in 5th grade with my 5th grade, but all we were drummers. We were just drummers. And in fact, and I know you're a great drummer. Thanks. And we built me and my friend Nick Torrey, we built our first drum kits out of, we'd get different size coffee cans or Planters peanut cans. And then I was at woodshop at school. I built a stand for it, and I traced it out, and I cut the little holes so I could put my different drums, so I could build a kit. And I put pennies into one of them so it was a snare. And then some of them I'd cut the bottom off of so they'd sound like a certain kind of tom. And we would just drum out songs. So I remember, and then I found somebody had left a marching band drum in a garbage, but I grew up in New York City. And I grabbed this, it was all marching band snare. So I had this, and he had his drums. And our first concert, we played in the hallway at my public school, PS 84 in 5th grade. And of course, the only thing we could play, because we were only drum band, we played "We Will Rock You," right? So we're like, and it was great. I remember we made a little riser. We got some desks, and we put our drums up on, our drum up on the riser. So, so that was the beginning. And so the Beatles, and then obviously Queen was really big then. And then the influences, I remember in my group, people were listening. It was, so it's 77, 78. So people were listening to all that California rock and all, Fleetwood Mac and stuff like that. But what really hooked me, Beatles, I was into rock. And then obviously the next band that sort of changed my life was the Stones. Right. And I remember my birthday party, I think that summer, those guys brought me, still one of my favorite live albums, Get Your Ya-Ya's Out.
Oh, yeah.
It was I think I busted a button on my trousers. You don't want my trousers to fall down now, do you? And then fucking jumping Jack Flash, right? And so that I was in. So I remember, but I was really into the Beatles for a long time, and that was when Beatlemania first started. Right, so I could go. I went and saw the Beatlemania show, and still hoping, because everyone was still alive. I was still hoping they'd get back together. But then I got really into the Stones. But then also in New York, I remember I was thinking about the early influences. I remember the first time I heard the Ramones, because it was that whole New York punk scene. The first time I heard that, I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
This is the greatest thing. Just the energy.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's when you were coming into you're about 10, 11 -ish,
exactly.
Really starting.
Yeah. And I'm hearing those bands, and I just remember the first time I heard the Ramones. That's my favorite part about music is, always, everyone's different, and it hits your body. Those waves hit your body in a certain way. And, the first time you hear a song, you're like, what the hell is that? Yeah. I'm like, I need to know more about this band. Like, I remember the first time, I think I was sitting, I remember it exactly. I was sitting in the back of a taxi cab in New York City, and some weird, beautiful music is coming through the radio. And I go, what the hell is this? He goes, this is Joy Division. And I go, oh, I love this. Yeah. And every time, and that's my favorite thing is, you go back to all your favorites but it's always discovering music. Like I was just playing right before I was talking to you, I was listening to Bowie. And I remember first time I heard Ziggy Stardust, just that, the Mick Ronson, I was like, what is this strange magic? Yeah. Because the other things, you and I've been around a long time, but a lot of those tones and the sounds, like they never existed until those bands created them. Right. I feel so lucky that, we got to grow up while I was alive, the Beatles were still together, the Stones were together, the Who, all the Kinks, all the original bands, that I loved, all that, that sort of started the British wave, which was the British invasion, which I really was my first, love of music. Sure, yeah. They were still going together, and we got to hear that, and those things you've never heard before. And then, you sort of keep expanding. And I think also, we lived in such a magical time. I think of the 70s, when I think of like top 40 radio. Yeah. Every genre of music was just like hitting at the top of its game. So you could listen to top 40 radio and you're hearing the best soul music. You're hearing the best, you're hearing incredible country. You're hearing amazing rock. You're hearing amazing hard rock. And, if you try to, there's no way, when they do those silly things where you like pick the best 100 songs of the 70s, I'm like, how would you do that? You have to pick a genre, right? Yeah. And, so we love music, but the Beatles were my gateway. And then from there, it just expanded to the Stones and then punk. And then I remember when I first got into Zeppelin, like 79. Yeah. And then I went down the whole sort of metal, early metal, obviously, and hard rock stuff and Sabbath. And then punk and then post-punk and then new wave was amazing when that first came in. But you would have like friends that would be, say, into like British new wave, was it new metal or like right new metal, like Priest and Maiden, exactly,
Rush guys, and then like you're the Beatles, and then every group of friends you would discover these new genres of music or it's bands or whatever, and you're like, and it was all new. Now you grew up in New York. What were some of the venues?
And we had the Garden. Yeah. So I saw everything at Madison Square Garden. Yeah, right. So my first concert was Kiss on the Dynasty tour, and and it was amazing. I'm going with my best buddy Jack Wagonseller, and we go. My parents obviously had to come with me because we were 11, and we're at the Garden, and that was amazing. And then always, I saw so many great because I certainly didn't go to smaller clubs. Like I would have wanted to go to CBGB's, and I think if I'd been more, I knew of it, and I wanted to go down there. But, and I think if I'd been a little more savvy, I probably would have gotten my way in there. But early on, at the Garden, I remember seeing, saw AC/DC. I saw, Rush and the Moving Pictures tour, and all those bands. But that was the main place back then that I saw music. Was at when I was kid. It was always at the Garden. There'd always be someone who would have great tickets, and we'd go see whoever was playing.
Yeah, especially in New York, because I know where I grew up in Pennsylvania. We competed with Cleveland. Cleveland would get the Stones, so I never got to see the Stones during their late 70s or early 80s. But now with you were able to see all those great bands and just phenomenal bands that wouldn't even come to smaller markets that became super legendary or important, or bands like Television even, or
of course,
stuff like that. So so you got to see a lot of the, especially at the Garden. I always remember Elvis played the Garden, 3 nights at the, and so every band that put out a great album at Madison Square Garden, you know.
Sure, I mean, you know, like that, the Zeppelin, the movie, the song remains the same. That's their garden concerts, you know. And it was such it was a great venue for big rock acts. Like I remember standing online back when you did, before there was computers and getting on the phone, like getting my tickets for Van Halen, right? For, you know, like.
Well, what year did you see them?
I saw them, I think it was the Women and Children First.
Really? Yeah.
Tour, which was great. It was like the perfect time. But I remember, and too, you know, we're talking about another age. So I stood online at the Garden to get those tickets.
Yeah.
And I got great seats for like $13.
Yeah.
13, like 1-3, right? Or $17. It was nothing, right? And you're so excited, and you get the T-shirt that falls apart in the first washing. But it was a great place to see. And it was also, you know, it was that time too. It was still like, you know, the 70s and the early 80s. It was a good vibe in those places. You know, everyone had their lighters. You're getting a contact high. Everyone's smoking weed, and they're passing it around. Everyone's sharing. And, you know, you're hoping to maybe sneak a beer in, or have someone buy you a beer. But those were, that was, you know, that I didn't get to go until later to other venues, you know, when I was a little older, like in high school. Then I would go to some of the smaller clubs and see bands that I loved.
Yeah. Was the, as far as the outdoor, was it the Meadowlands, or where would were there?
Oh yeah, because it was the Meadowlands in New Jersey.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, that came a little later, right? So I remember like the Stones played out there. I never went out there to see a concert. I'm trying to think. I went there to maybe see the Giants. And then it was Jones Beach in the summer, like bands would play. And then there was certainly, of course, freshman year in high school was when Simon and Garfunkel got together again and played in the park. In Central Park, right? You know, so I remember getting there with a bunch of, you know.
You were there.
Yeah, I was there.
I was in New York when I didn't get to go.
I mean, we were there, but we were like, you know, I was 14, and, you know, me and a bunch of chums from school, we got there at dawn and laid out our blanket and sat there all day and watched all the bands. And I remember coming for other concerts, because they have like Earth Day concerts. I remember seeing B-52s play there right on the Great Lawn in Manhattan, in New York City, in Central Park. And that was great.
Tell me a little about, because my buddy and I, we were going to England, and we were stuck at the airport, and because Freddie Laker had standby, so we didn't want to go into town because we thought we were going to miss our flight. And we're like, oh, Simon and Garfunkel's playing. So that was a big regret, obviously. But I'm just curious. Tell me a little about what you remember about that show, because it's legendary. It's such. The facade. There was the water tank. That's, you know.
Oh yeah, because it was like the people who did it was like the set designers for SNL who did their set. Looked like SNL. Yeah. I have to be honest. I'm thinking like I was so much more concerned with like the girls who I was with. You know, like I was like making out with somebody than the concert. And it was more like the event. I mean, I'm certainly, you know, my dad did have a lot of Simon and Garfunkel albums, and he used to play those all the time because he was more into folky stuff, which I always appreciated. I appreciated the darker Simon and Garfunkel stuff. It had like a little more of that moody atmospheric stuff. But of that concert, I just remember it just being cool to be there. But I also remember like it was one of those cautionary tales early on where like you spent all day there, and then if you needed to go take a leak, it was going to be like 2 hours to go 100 feet and get back. Right. So, you know, it's not necessarily the best place to drink beer all day.
Right.
And it's funny because there was another place that was the Intrepid, which is the aircraft carrier on 42nd Street. And I remember going to see, because this was probably 8th grade, so this was before that concert. It was also the first time I ever drank beer, but it was like I went to go see Jefferson Starship. I think they were calling themselves Airplane again, because I was a huge Jefferson Airplane fan. I remember the Dixie Dregs opened up for them, so that was a really fun venue. It wasn't too big. You know, because that's always the Garden's fun, you know, just for those epic things. But, you know, my favorite thing about live music is being able to see the band.
Right.
Like if I have to look, you know, this is also back then, obviously, when there were no screens. Right.
Yeah. You had to get up. Yeah. Get up close.
It's funny. Like, that's how I went to see a concert. I went to see AC/DC on for those about to rock, We Salute You. Sure. And
Nice, yeah.
that was the day I was probably in 10th grade or ninth grade. And that's when I learned I needed to get glasses because we were so far away. But I go, the first band, that dude, the lead singer, he's got a really high voice. And all my friends are like, it's a girl.
It's a girl.
I'm like, okay. I better get some glasses.
Yeah.
But then like the smaller venues have always been, my favorite. I've had, as I'm sure, I want to see the band. I want to feel it.
Yeah.
And certainly back in the day, things have so changed because of the internet.
Yeah.
The cool thing is like, there used to be scenes in each area would have its scene and you'd see these great bands before they broke nationally and internationally. You get to see amazing venues. I mean, like what were some of the big bands in your area, in the industrial Midwest up there?
Oh, well, locally or nationally?
Or locally that then broke, but people you got to see,
well, like Donnie Iris was the Pittsburgh, Joe Grishecki in the Iron City House Rockers. Those were the guys that when I saw them, I said, wow, they got record deals. Wow, you mean I could actually do that,
Right.
And we had other bands come in that, as far as the concerts, I miss Zeppelin. I had to see them twice, and they had tragedies happen. I'm like, oh, come on, But so we would go to those clubs to see the bands like Grishecki, Iron City House Rockers, and so forth. And those are the guys that motivated me. But the town was so small that not the town, but the industry was so small that I knew I have to go somewhere else because the business was shifting, and I knew California is where all the bands are doing stuff for New York, So that was, I hated to do it, but it was like I had to do it,
Yeah, of course.
But so there was a lot of in music there, obviously, a lot of bands coming in, and Grishecki was telling me stories. He's seeing Dave Clark 5. He's seeing, all these garage rock bands coming in for nothing, playing for, like I said, $9, $5 when he was a kid. And I'm going, man, so little small, like, I don't know how many 1,000-seaters maybe or something. So you're springing your imagination, So the one thing I always admired about New York City and where you grew up is, man, there's just so much going on, and there's just any night of the, time of the day, and it's just a tangible. There's
and especially then, it was certainly, and that was a great period because all of those, so many great bands have come out of there. You go back to the '60s and think about like Velvet Underground, one of my most favorite bands. And obviously before that, all the, the Brill Building and all the bands they were creating. Remember, but that amazing New York, because I was a big UK punk fan, but the whole New York punk scene, with Dead Boys and you've got Ramones, and then Talking Heads come out of that scene. All those great bands that came out of that scene, Max's, GB's. And it was such an exciting, alive time. New York Dolls, all that shit that went on before that. And it was a great place, and it was accessible. It was gritty. Obviously the time really influenced that music because New York it wasn't in great shape back then. But it inspired that raunchy rock music that I still love to this day. Yeah. But I had the most fortuitous music experience in New York City. It was my prom. So this is like 1985, and I was with my date, and we'd go on a dinner, but we didn't want to go to the dance part because the dance prom part was going to be at the Windows on the World, at the top of the World Trade Center. I was like, I don't want to go up there. It seems like we're not going to be able to drink there. I'm not going to have any fun. And there were a bunch of us. We were going to go to the Cat Club. Oh yeah. So have you been there? I've heard of it. Yeah. It was great. I've seen some great bands there. So, but anyway, we're just going there. We thought, there's going to be a DJ. We're just going to dance. Blah 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 blah. The Beastie Boys are touring that year with Madonna. Wow. Yeah. They hadn't quite broken yet. They show up and they do their full, like a 2 hours. Oh, man. Wow. I was like, and I hadn't planned it, and it was the most magical thing. So my prom night, these guys, they're right there, and they're in their full sort of Run DMC period where they're just like, and it was magical, and that's one of those experiences that I'll never forget, and like made a perfect prom night. Yeah. It was one of those magical New York things that you couldn't have planned, and it just fell into your lap. Yeah, you just never knew walking in any night what was going to be happening there. That's part of the excitement, huh?
Do you remember what were you listening to back then? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. I remember really well. So because they would go through different iterations, obviously, as managements would come in and out. But like WNEW had a lot of rock, and WPIX had a lot. That's the first time I remember hearing. That was the first place I heard the Ramones. That was the first place I heard REM, like Flying Lizards. I was hearing, and you'd have to find your shows.
Yeah.
But then I remember in high school, the most magical station on the right day, if the wind was blowing in the right way and I touched my radio receiver in the right way, I could get WLIR from Long Island.
Yeah, Long Island, yeah.
And WLIR, there've been documentaries made on them. They broke all these bands. They broke all these UK bands. So it was like the first time I'd hear Echo and the Bunnymen or whatever. And that was amazing. But it literally, I would turn my radio on in the morning when I woke up and I go see if I could get it. Because it was in between like two Manhattan stations with much stronger signals.
Yeah.
But that was, it's the magic of discovery, right? And knowing about stuff, because now everything's ubiquitous. You can create a song in your home studio and you can be an international sensation the next day.
Right.
But in the old days, you built a small following, you built a large following in your town, and then you broke bigger and bigger and hopefully got signed. And so you had these little. I think about all these different scenes. You have the Minneapolis, you got Replacements and Husker Du and all those guys, or you got the Seattle scene. You've got all these things that finally broke. I was really lucky. I went down to school in North Carolina for a little while.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, there were great bands. I got in there like 2 years after REM had still been playing on like fraternity house porches.
Yeah, wow.
But still, by that point, they were still not playing arenas. They were playing like the basketball, gym at Duke. So you could still see them in like 3,000 seaters, which was amazing.
Yeah,
But then there were all these cool bands. I was into this band, the Connells.
Yeah, Connells.
There was a local. Yeah, I just love them, and they would play on fraternity steps. So and different bands would come through, and that was. It's the most magical thing. Like one of my most favorite bands in the world. Do you know the Tragically Hip?
Yeah.
So big Canadian band. In Canada, they're only playing, the Maple Leaf. They're playing the Air Canada Center. They're playing big places, big arenas. But when they come to LA, they would play House of Blues or they play Troubadour. And so it was amazing to see this because I think they're the greatest live band I've ever seen.
Really?
He's just he's magical. He's passed 3 years ago, Gord Downey, he was a poet, and he just every moment was alive. And that's. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but that's
it's fine.
That's what I look for in live music, and it's been interesting as things have changed. The reason I want to go see your concert is I don't want to hear the album per se. I want to have an experience where you feel like there's a communication, there's something, this isn't how it's happened every night. Because I've gone to a few concerts recently, and obviously the economics of the music business have changed so dramatically.
Right.
But I feel like, where you're paying top dollar to go to see these shows, and they feel pretty set.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, we feel like even the banter is probably the same banter from the town before.
Right. Yeah.
It's almost got a Vegas-y feel. And so it's always refreshing because what you want about rock and roll, what you want about rock music is that it's spontaneous and dangerous. That you don't know what the fuck's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, is he gonna jump off the fucking stage? I want to know that solo is he's doing it that night.
Night. Yeah.
Certainly that's what made, U2 before, they've changed a lot over the last few years, but it's like what made them excited. You didn't know what Bono was going to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the band didn't know, and they just have to keep vamping while he climbs up the radio tower, and you're like, or grabs the girl out of the audience, and that made it exciting because you're part of something that only exists in that moment.
In that moment, yeah.
In that moment, it's so magical. And also, I love going to smaller venues, bouncing back, because you want to be able to. I want to hear the music directly, right?
Yeah.
You want to feel it. You want to be able to see the singer's expression or the guitar player's expression, and you get that visceral hit of the amps and the music, and that's what makes it so exciting. It's just how it affects you and having those once in a lifetime experiences.
Yeah, I think that seeing the bands that I remember the most, obviously, were
Right.
the ones when I was like, say, 14 or 15, that are still around
Sure.
at a
Yeah.
small level, small venue that are now like, well, one AC/DC or someone like that. I
Right.
saw them
Right.
with Vaughn, and I still remember
Yeah.
seeing him. You know, I could still see the look on his
Oh,
face.
that's so
or whatever.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, so you're a little kid, but you remember because you're sucking all that information in. You know,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
And
So,
what is the great? I mean, I know it's an impossible question, but like, what's your favorite concert that you ever present at?
yeah, well, you know, back then AC/DC, and then I saw believe it or not, UFO. I don't know if you remember.
I love UFO.
Yeah,
Yeah, come on.
UFO. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. But I remember being there, and it was like Blue Oyster Cult was opening, and
All
I
right,
remember
yeah.
UFO was coming in, and they were playing so loud, and I was so like into looking at everything. Yeah, I was about
Yeah.
12 or 13, and a big chunk of the ceiling came down. And this is the era where like we were like nothing mattered, no one cared about anything. So this big chunk of ceiling falls into the orchestra pit. The guys it kept playing.
Right.
Oh, okay. And the audience didn't care. The venue didn't care. Yeah, just keep it going. You know, and it's this big pile of dust coming up. But yeah, UFO, and then like and Leonard Skinner. I saw them in '76, and it was crazy. And if you remember, people in those days were throwing M80s off the balconies.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, what's going on?
Oh yeah.
I'm like this. Watch. But bands like. And I missed Elvis. I had an opportunity. My mom wanted to take me because she knew I loved Elvis.
Yeah.
And I was like, it was New Year's Eve, '76, his phenomenal Pittsburgh show. It's legendary. And to this day, I'm like still, but I said, I got to let it go, man. Yeah, like you said, the smaller venues were the ones that I remember the most. And I try to mention that to people as well. Go see any band you can, because you never know what you're going to say, man, I had an opportunity to see them at this point in time and I didn't go or something.
Yeah. And that's the exciting thing. Cause I mean, I've had so many great musical experiences where I had no plan. I didn't know the band I was going to go see. We just ended up at some place, and you just vibe with those guys, and then you follow, it's magical.
When did you start picking up guitar? Do you remember, like, what?
Yeah, because it was I remember really well. So I'm trying to think. So I was playing the drums. in like 5th and 6th grade, and then I'm trying to think. I started playing guitar in 7th grade. Wow. And I had this really great teacher over the summer down in New Jersey, and we're starting on acoustic. And I had like a $5 acoustic, with the action was like this.
Yeah.
But you get strong fingers. I remember Nancy Wilson always talked about that. How she learned on really bad guitars, and it made her super strong. Right.
Yeah.
And so he taught me a bunch of stuff. And then I ended up getting, I remember at like some garage sale, I found a pickup that I could put inside, the whole of my acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And then in 8th grade, I started a band in earnest with my buddy Ian Levy. And I'd gotten, but this is so funny, I'd gotten the shittiest, so Guitar Center didn't exist when I was a kid, right? There was 48th Street, right, in Manhattan, where all the music places were. Where Manny's was, and the original Sam Ash, and then all these used places where, like, Johnny Thunders is selling his guitar so I could buy some Smack, right? And I remember I'm in 8th grade. It's time to buy an electric guitar. And I had like $100 in my pocket that I'd saved up just for this guitar. And I remember you going to Manny's and all the big, there weren't that many music shops, right? Those were the big places. And you go there, and Led Zeppelin would go there to buy their guitar. People go there to buy their gear. You couldn't fucking touch it. Every guitar was behind glass.
Wow, yeah.
Everything was behind glass. And they'd see some 13-year-old schmuck like me coming in there. They wouldn't even let you touch it, right? Yeah. And then they were also, and I remember, and I also developed this real like hatred of guys who work in music stores back then. They were all like, they were all, because this was like Eddie. They were all playing Eruption.
Yeah.
They're all tapping, right? Yeah. And they're like, hey, they're judging you.
Yeah,
like, I'm a kid, blah, blah, blah. So the first guitar I got, for $100, the only guitars they had out, I remember at Manny's, they had these Japanese knockoffs called Hondo. The brand was Hondo, right?
Yeah.
So I got this, I don't know, only because it was the one that was $100. I bought this sort of SG knockoff, and it was one of those guitars where it could stay in tune for maybe one chord, and then it was out, right? And but we're trying, you know, me and my buddy Ian Levy, we started this band, and we had very slightly different musical tastes. Like, he was getting really into the blues for like this 8th grader. He was really into like serious blues, and I was really into rock. You know, I wanted to play, we used to play Stone songs and stuff like that. So, and punk songs, Ramones songs. So we ended up calling the band Black and Blue.
Yeah.
Black for hard rock. And he
was blue. Yeah.
And he was a great guitar player. And so for all of 8th grade, we'd have band practice every Saturday at his house on 86th Street. And we even had groupies. Girls would come over, and they made us shirts. Like,
wow. Yeah.
You know, what was it, 1980, you know, press on Black and Blue.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so we ended up in 8th grade convincing them, because my school had dances, and for the 7th and 8th grade dance, usually they had a DJ, but we're going like, hey, how about we play the dance? And we auditioned for the school, and I remember our money song was Brown Sugar, right? Yeah. And so we would we played for the principal and one of the teachers. We played Brown Sugar for her in the music room. She's like, okay, yeah, you can play the dance. Yeah. And then suddenly, and this was a good learning experience, but it scarred me for a long time. We were like, okay, let's get together 30 songs. Yeah. And we probably had 5 of them down really well, and the other 25 not so much. And I just remember, you know, because it was the first time I'd ever played live for, you know, and we were hoping people were just going to hang out, but everyone sort of rushed to the front of the stage and they're watching us. Yeah. And I remember, like, I'm trying, like, my hands are so sweaty that I can't do those opening chords for Brown Sugar, and I'm freaking out. And then, of course, my guitar's never staying in tune. The bass player, we discovered later, had never even plugged in. So he never even learned the songs. He's just pretending. God. He's pretending to play. And the drummer. And we had a couple of good songs. Like I remember, like we used to play da na 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 was the Ramones song. Standing on Second Avenue. I just want to have something to do, right? Yeah. And that one we had down. That was the first song that I'd ever learned by listening to the album. That's what I loved about the Ramones and punk rock. It's like, I think I can figure this out. Yeah. But I'm still struggling with Black Dog. Yeah. But but it taught me a very valuable lesson for the next time, you know, I played out live. It was like, rehearse, right? Like, you just need to, like, because it's all going to go wrong and you're going to freak out. And, you know, cut to when you and I first met, I guess a couple years before that, I'd started a band with my friend in LA, and we were playing all the time. We had the same crossover music interests. And I remember the first time we played a gig, I mean, I made us run through our set twice before we even showed up at the venue, because I was so scarred from my 8th grade experience. And you can't leave anything to chance, right? Right. But yeah, so I really was so into rock and roll in 8th grade. And in 9th grade, I remember I sang in a band, and then I was in another band where no one ever wanted to play bass, right? So eventually I was like, I'll play bass in a band. But, you know, I just wanted to play guitar. And then I was always sort of the default singer, but I never wanted to be the singer, because I'm not a great singer, but I have a lot of ego, so I like being in front.
Sure,
I want to play guitar.
Have fun, man.
Yeah, have fun. But I remember making a very conscious decision around 8th or 9th grade where I guess about 9th grade, where I go, I'm either going to be an actor or a musician, because they were the 2 things I was most interested in. Sure. And at the time I go, because I really feel like I have to devote myself to one to be good at it. Right. And so I went with the acting path. And then it wasn't until my late 30s, my early 40s, where my best buddy, Mike Coleman, who was a bass player, we just started jamming, you know, in the amp that I still bought from Manny's in 1980, you know, a solid state amp. We're plugging in there. And I'd gotten, my wife had bought me, because she knew when we first were together, she bought me for our first birthday of mine that we spent together. She bought me this beautiful 52 Telly, right? Wow. You know, like the reissue, the classic one, but it was beautiful. And so I had that, and then eventually I got a nice amp, and we were playing together, and then we just started a band, and we got a lockout space, and we were playing all the time, and it was great because, you know, I don't think I had the know-how you know, when I was 13 to really become a good musician. I did not understand how to pursue it, right? And it was there was no tabs. The tabs didn't even exist. You had to read sheet. I remember when I got Back in Black, it was just sheet music, right? You know? And so, and then, you know, I'd taken piano and I knew how to read sheet music, but I didn't know how to translate it to a guitar neck. And, but then in my late 30s, early 40s, I really pursued guitar because I always loved it. And I was always sort of playing and writing. I'd write songs throughout the years, throughout all my 20s and stuff. I had a 4-track and I was always recording shit.
Wow, yeah.
But then when GarageBand came along, when I was able to do it all on this thing, and I had all these amps to play through, then I took it really seriously. And then, you know, and then we just played all the time, you know, and then we got our lockout space because we were all on TV shows. We all had a little cash, so we'd rent a space in North Hollywood, and we just played. And then we got into recording, and you know, because things have become so much more accessible. I mean, it's interesting. I believe firmly if GarageBand had existed when I was 12 or 13, I would have just stayed with music because you just had, you know, access to all of that creativity. And I mean, you know, you remember it was like recording your stuff on a 4-track, on your cassette. You know, by the time you get to the third, you know, take or the fourth, you know, you're just, it's so degraded, right? You're losing a generation each time. But it was fun. But music still holds that place that probably because it's not my job, it's not my career. It's still, it's this thing that gives me so much pleasure. And I just love playing and playing out and being with people and creating, you know, the same way that what I love about acting, of like vibing off the other person and creating in that moment. And that's my favorite part about music. Like if you've got a band and people you play, you know, you've got a chemistry with, and you've got camaraderie and trust with, you just, you know, you're creating shit together that you didn't plan, and you make a mistake. You're like, oh, that's really cool. I love that note. That's a song. Let's do that. And then you start writing together. And so it's always been really exciting. Like here I am in my buddy's studio.
It's awesome.
He's got a ton of great guitars in here.
That's cool, man.
He's the real deal. He was, started out, he's British. He's a Cockney guy. He started out in England selling merch when he was a teenager. And then ended up talking his way into being like a guitar tech for all these bands in the 80s. So he was a guitar tech backline guy. With like Pill and so many great bands. And then he ended up becoming the bass player in the Soup Dragons.
Oh, nice.
Because they're like, you know, whatever, they fired their bass player, and then he learned all the songs in a week. He tells a great story about it too, because he learned them all. And he shows up to the first, he just learned them by rote, learned them all. They show up, they go, oh, no, everything's a half step lower.
Oh,
it's like, what?
What?
He got a crash course in music theory because he's like, I just learned them by rote, and now I got to learn everything a half step lower.
Down.
But he's got all this great stuff. So we're, you know, it's fun, and he's always creating music. And here he's got a lot of dance stuff that he's into.
It encourages you as well, being around all that. You know, it's just really fun environment. And
for sure.
I noticed a while back, and I was listening to you guys online, and there was one track you were talking about.
Echo and the Bunnymen.
Echo and the Bunnymen. Thank you. And one of the songs that was the first thing I thought of. You were hitting some chord. I forgot what track was, but I was hearing I got to sound like Echo and the Bunnymen. So so that was.
Well, it's funny, you know. It's like you know, it took us. I think, you know, in the beginning, especially, we sort of had our teenage band years in our late 30s, early 40s. So for the beginning, you're sounding like your heroes, right? You haven't quite created your own thing. Because at the time I was really into the Edge. Because I really sonically, I was so in love with what he'd done with the guitar and with effects. Because that was another one. I remember when that first album came out, and the first time I heard Electrico from Boy. And you're like, you're hearing that delay. And I was like, what is this magic? What is this amazing sound? And all those early albums, I was really into his guitar sound and his use of effects. For creation and for inspiration. And I went pretty crazy. I basically, because I was on TV and I had money, I basically built like a little guitar center in my house. And I went from, but it's funny, you know, I had every pedal known to man because I wanted to try it. But then it's interesting. as I matured as a musician, I realized, oh no, you got to keep it simple, and you find your sound. And eventually, I did find my sound. You know what? The first pedal I ever bought, I bought at Sam Ash on 48th Street in 1980. It was the Boss OD1.
Yeah.
Overdrive pedal.
Yeah,
and
overdrive.
I still have it, and I love it. And then I just became that sound. You know, I need an overdrive pedal, so I'm obsessed now with my Boss SD1. I use that all the time. And then I need a little delay and a little reverb, and maybe a little chorus every once in a while.
Sure.
And then I'm good. I'm great. That's all I need. You know, I've kept, you know, after having this huge rig and I had this huge pedal board. I was like, no,
sure.
Sounds you need. You know, these are the ones I keep going to, and these are the ones. Well, it's like an actor. I think when you start out as an actor, you're copying somebody, right? You're imitating something you've seen before, and then at a certain point, you find your own voice.
Your voice.
I think that's true of probably any art. Like if you're a writer, you're probably, you know. So with music, for a while, I was copying my heroes, and then at a certain point, you go, this is what I like. This is the sounds that I like to make. These are the kind of tunes that get me going. This is where I'm going to go if you leave me, you know, to my own devices. So that's an exciting discovery. And I'm looking forward to getting back into music. Because what happened, too, is we started recording. Because our band was in their early days, but we were playing a lot. We were rehearsing a lot. And my buddy owns it, The Village recording studio you know, in West LA. And he called us up one night and he goes, I got a studio free tomorrow. I'll give it to you, and I'll give you an engineer, and you can record some songs.
Yeah.
And I remember, you know, so it was our first time in the studio, and it was like that concert at 8th grade, right? You know, I had that red light fever. You're like, oh my God. You're feeling all panicked. And I remember our drummer, he never played to a click, so we didn't play to a click. And then all those songs ended up being unusable because I think they were like 140 beats a minute song. He's playing like 166. I was like, blah, 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 blah. So we didn't have the groove, right?
Yeah.
But then, okay, well, this is amazing. They've got Pro Tools. I'm going to learn recording.
Yeah.
And you know, so then we got our lockout, and I set up a whole recording studio in there, and then bought all that gear and learned all about Pro Tools and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's exciting to learn about recording, but then I think to that point of like reducing my guitar rig and keeping things simple, you know, the danger of recording shit in the box is you've got too many options, right? You know, I mean, if you think about, right, you know, that Sgt. Pepper was recorded on a 4-track.
4-track, yeah.
4-track.
4 tracks.
And their early stuff was recorded on 2 and 3 tracks, right?
Yeah.
So, but you know, you've made maybe the most sonically innovative album of all time on 4 tracks. So,
right.
You know, you shouldn't A/B yourself to death. Maybe options are the enemy of art at some point. And I think about all my favorite bands that are recording in the 70s and 80s, the top they had is like 8 tracks that they've got to lay shit down. So you have to make choices, and you got to also you got to be tight and know how to play together. Yeah. So you know so eventually I was like, okay, you can't A/B yourself to death and spend 2 years trying to perfect this song.
Yeah.
And you know, but I think that probably is just to my philosophy of life, like keep it simple.
Yeah. It's cool on those. They're like 4 songs, and I think you were playing that. Are you playing that Telecaster that you were talking about earlier? Is a
probably
Blonde Telly, I think.
Yeah, Blonde Telly. Yeah.
And then you had a Strat too.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know. Are those your main choices, or do you?
I'm a Fender guy.
Yeah.
You know, I think just like. But it's the same thing. It's like they seem like such iconic guitars. Like the Telly is not necessarily the most sonically diverse, but I just love that it's a fucking piece of wood. It's gorgeous. It just looks badass. Yeah. You always know where it is. Yeah. You know, and it's just solid. And you know, with my Telly or my Strat, with those Fenders, you can leave them in a case for a year in your car. You pull that sucker out, and it's in tune. Right? I mean, it's just magical, right? I just love them. So, you know, emotionally, I'm a Fender guy. I like the feel of them. I like the necks. I like, you know, and then Strats obviously have a little more sonic diversity. But I mean, I eventually got a Les Paul because everyone's got to have one, right? At some point, and try it out.
Yeah, sure.
And it's really cool. It's like a different thing when I'm doing my Mick Ronson emulations, then I pull that sucker out. But you know, gun to my head, it's gonna be a Telly or a Strat. And those are and then, you know, finding the right amp, and you go either between a Vox or a, you know, twin reverb. But this, my buddy here has got, which I'm gonna.
Yeah, man.
See that?
This is a 76
Oh,
with the mini humbuckers.
yeah. Oh, man. Awesome.
And dude,
Awesome.
it is. Hold on, I gotta take
Yeah.
It's magical.
Oh,
because that's the other thing too about guitars, right? Which you discover, like they're not coming off the assembly line. They each have their own mojo. That thing, the action thing, it's got a million songs in it. So I said, hey, no matter what, when you're gonna sell this guitar, this one I'm buying off.
Yeah.
It's magic, right?
There's magic in there. Yeah.
But I mean, I think David Crosby, I heard him say once, it takes like 5 years to make a good guitar. Like, you playing it or someone plays it, or that's why, when you buy a vintage instrument, it's already been seasoned, right? And it's got that tone he's got all these beautiful guitars, but it's fun. I love it.
Yeah.
And,
The one I noticed I was reading your online now, talking about the 70s.
Yeah.
Now your father, and you mentioned your father, he stage managed Joe Franklin's show.
He was the director, actually.
Or the director of it.
Yeah.
Now, I saw this incredible clip, and I'm wondering because Franklin, when I was a kid, he was like my first, like we just started getting HBO, late 70s. And so I got to see New York City for like the first time, and like through Joe Franklin and all these artists and actors, Broadway, everybody coming in, and the one thing I saw was he had Jay Giles band, and I was like, man, it's cool.
So Jay Giles, I can't believe you brought up the story, because I was actually going to bring this story up. That's so funny.
Right.
So Jay Giles band were huge Joe Franklin shows. And so when that album broke that had Freeze Frame on it, the only show they were going to do in New York was Joe Franklin. So my dad tells me, he goes, I got Jay Giles band coming in. And I was a huge fan of theirs from Love Stinks.
Sure, yeah.
Because, before they were playing videos on TV, they would play videos at the movie theater, like down at 8th Street, like where I'd go to see Rocky Horror Picture Show, where you'd go to see Song Remains the Same. When movies would come through, they'd always play the Love Stinks video before Rocky Horror. And I was like, I love that. Boom, wow. Dum, dum. So I was like, so he's like, Jay Giles is going to be on Joe today. You got to come down. So I got kicked out of class for being, I'm in 9th grade. I got kicked out of class for being a wise ass. And I'm standing, and she's like, you wait out there in the hall. And I'm like, I got to go to Joe Franklin. So I was like, so I almost got expelled. I left. I just fucking left. And I went down to the studio and I saw them, and it was amazing. So I watched them tape.
Wow.
I watched them tape the show, and they were so cool.
Yeah.
Wolf, and they did their they lip synced the freeze frame, and they poured the paint on each other. And then they gave us, and talking about great shows and unexpected shows, like they gave us tickets to see them at the Garden. Great seats. Me and my dad went.
Yeah.
And that was, especially for a band that I really liked, but it weren't my favorite. It was maybe in the top 3 concerts I've ever been to in my entire life.
Wow.
So first of all, George Thorogood opens for them.
Wow. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's just like, he's like, and he's just shuddering around with that big Gretsch or whatever he's playing. He's killing it. But Jay Giles, this is what I'm talking about. This brings us full circle. What I wanted in a band, they literally played. They played until Peter Wolf passed out.
Wow.
They played until he couldn't play anymore. They played like it was like a 3-hour show.
Wow.
And like it was alive and crazy. And he's just giving 1,000% until he. And I remember he'd give him oxygen, and he just passed out.
Yeah.
It was all the old days too, right? Everyone throwing joints up on the stage, and they're smoking them. You know, no one would do that now. So that was a magical Joe Franklin experience. And one of the greatest sort of unexpected musical experiences of my young life. Yeah.
That's awesome. You were there, man.
Totally. It's so cool.
I remember they got Joe a trophy or something with 2 Playboy bunnies or something that came out.
Because Joe gave them the whole show. The whole show was just the Jay Giles band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's cool.
But Joe was just unheralded as far as like just the amount of art that this guy brought to television, or just everybody, to us.
Well, he kind of, he and kids, you could go YouTube Joe Franklin, because you can check these old shows out. Because what was cool about him is he kind of was sort of the inventor of that genre, of the interview show. Right. But what made Joe so unique was everyone who came on his show, he made them feel like a star. So you could literally have in one seat, you could have Bing Crosby or Barbara Streisand.
Yeah.
And next to them, you'd have like Tony Valentino, who sings at the diner in Passaic. And he'd be like, Mr. Tony Valentino, he is the biggest. He is up and coming. He's a marvelous, marvelous singer. I'll check him out at, Randy's Diner in Passaic.
Yeah.
And, he had that thing. He had no, he was just passionate and really knew show business and cared about making everyone feel great, right? So there was never been anyone like him. He was without guile, really. And he'd been around forever, and he had a radio show forever. And he was a really unique cat. And I was very lucky because, growing up with my dad working at Channel 9 at WOR, where Joe Franklin was, it was right there at Times Square in New York City. And it was an old school TV station. It was all the sets were around, it was sort of a round room. You'd have, the news here, you'd have Romper Room here, you'd have Joe Franklin here, Bowling for Dollars, bowling alley there.
Wow.
And they would just swing the cameras around to each set to film it. And I grew up there. That was my dad's work. And he was one of two directors there, and they sat in the control room, and he did a lot of live television.
Wow.
And even like shows like the Joe Franklin Show, they record them as if they were live. And that was magical too. You're watching my dad sort of at mission control with an analog stopwatch going, camera 2, camera 3, fade up, fade up. But and I got to see so many people because of the Joe Franklin Show, and I spent so much time just hanging out at my dad's work. Yeah. So I remember you'd see Tiny Tim, or you'd see Bing Crosby, or you'd see Tim Conway, you'd see all these amazing Eartha Kitt. You just see people coming in and out. So that was sort of one of those magical New York, childhood experiences.
That was always, I never knew how, well, it's interesting how you mentioned how the way they filmed everything, because I never knew how, it was just, I thought it was some studio in somewhere, I don't know. I was 14 or whatever. So I had no idea that it was right in where you mentioned that.
When I was a kid, it was, So it was right there at 42nd Street and Broadway, right at Times Square. I remember you come out of the subway station at 42nd, it's all just porno and kung fu movies. And just in arcades and just crazy shit going on. And the camel guy blowing the smoke out of the side and all that stuff. Nathan's Hot Dogs is right there. And it was just this tiny sort of, it doesn't exist anymore now. It's some sort of luxury high-rise hotel, but it was this sort of 4-story building, and one floor had the offices and one floor had the studio, and it was just a studio. And it was so, probably been built in the 50s. And, but a cool place to, grow up, and a cool experience to have. But eventually sometime in the 80s, they moved out to New Jersey to Secaucus. And then I think they probably had proper studios. But it was very, for a New York City television, it was very sort of, not high technology at all. Just very simple analog.
Like hometown television.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I'm sure when you being there so much with your father, watching these actors, picking up on just the minutia that these guys, how they prepare or how they do stuff, that as you became when you were a fairly young kid so I'm sure all of those lessons, absorbed all that.
And you've been around show business, and also, I don't think my dad had a very high paying job. We didn't have a ton of money, but Joe got tickets to every Broadway musical, and I'm sure that's how we got to go to Beatlemania. And Joe had already seen it, so he'd always give my dad and me tickets. And then the other thing he gave, which goes back to my 8th grade band and my groupies, Joe Franklin had these vouchers for Bagel Nosh, which was like this little bagel restaurant. So I had all this Bagel Nosh cash, and so we'd Black and Blue would be going through. We playing Jump Jack Flash, and we'd have a couple of our Catholic girls' school groupies there, and I'm like, hey guys, should we go to Bagel Nosh for lunch? And I'd say I was the big spender, so we'd walk down to 72nd Street, go to the Bagel Nosh, and lunch is on me. Get an orange soda, no problem. I've got Bagel Nosh dollars.
Oh man, that's fun. I didn't know. I was really excited to ask you about that whole Joe Franklin thing, because I just was, to this day, that whole thing just is still part of, I think about it all
That's
the time,
cool. Yeah.
So
Because a lot of people know it just because I remember Billy Crystal in the 80s did a spoof of him on SNL.
Right.
And but it's been fun because now with the internet, I point to my computer like you're the internet.
Yeah.
But with the internet, you've got access to all of these old shows. You go on YouTube and a lot more of them popped up. And I went back, I think like a year ago and watched. So there's so many more there, and I remember all the different sets and being there. So it was super cool. And my dad and he had an amazing relationship, and he was with Joe until Joe went off the air. And very fortunate to have had those experiences.
It's like that style of television, that live. It's almost like still a not a throwback, but a tied into the 50s. That era of television. Yeah. I don't know if you'll ever see that again, or will we? I'd love that variety.
No,
it's like everything's so over the top now that you don't have just people sitting there telling their stories about how they got into the biz, or how, like when I was a kid, the Three Stooges used to come they had one of the Stooges had a brother lived just outside of Pittsburgh. So we had this guy named Paul Shannon. He had a little kid show, and the Stooges would come on and they'd do little slapsticks, and this was towards the end of their career. But I was like, man, that's, I never knew what the connection was, but here we got to see the Three Stooges,
That's so cool. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So that, of course, was why when I discovered Joe Franklin, because we would get cable, I think in the late.
And then, because WR became a superstation.
Yeah.
Like TBS was, right? So you could get it all around.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, that was required viewing, man. You were like, Joe Franklin, I forget what time he'd be, but I'm like, I'm going home. I'm going to watch Joe Franklin.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. I didn't know. That's neat, man.
Yeah, so pretty neat. So, and then the other things, too, just touch upon, I remember, when you were like walking around Manhattan and as a kid and stuff. I remember one time this is in 79 or whatever, I made a wrong turn and I'm walking down the Hells Angels. You remember walking by the Hells Angel clubhouse and there was a big stuffed bear hanging out that window.
You made a really wrong turn, man.
Yeah. And there's all these motorcycles and I'm looking at it, I go, wow, what are all these bikes? And then I see the logo. Oh boy, there's a Hells Angels. I don't want to trip and knock in.
No, don't knock. No, come on, man. Well, growing up, because you weren't from New York. That's the thing. Like growing up in New York, you knew there were a lot of wrong turns to make, and you learned not to make those wrong turns because it's so funny going down to like the Lower East Side now in Manhattan, where CBGB's is now, it's a John Varvatos, right?
Varvatos,
thank God, because he loves that band, so he saved the sort of space and put his shop in there. But I mean, no one, that was the East Village. You didn't go down there. You went down there to buy drugs or get stabbed. Those are the only two things to do down there. And now, you can go to your little meatball parlor, or to the cider bar, and it's all, it's interesting because, well, just like talking about Times Square, it's certainly a much safer, cleaner place now to live. But I guess, with the patina of youth and, looking through, looking into the past, I'm glad I grew up there when I did, when I still had that grit. Not that I would want my child to grow up in that city now.
No.
It was incredibly dangerous and I was mugged all the time. And it was but it had that energy, and that energy, I think, produced a lot of art. Smarter people than I have said that, and there's a lot, all this music is coming out of, the birth of hip hop and rap, it's all, everything's in punk, and it's all coming out of that gritty, New York energy.
Yeah.
And all, and lots of different towns had, I mean, obviously Detroit and Boston, I mean, all this London, they all had, but, and I feel lucky too, that we grew up in this sort of, you said so astutely, the TV shows, it's almost like the 50s.
Yeah.
And we grew up in a time where things were pretty recognizable to someone who may have lived 20 years ago. The technology was still, we lived in this analog, and we got to see the transfer to digital world. Yeah. Right. And we got to see it hands down in music, and we got to see it in what I do in film and television and stuff like that. And I'm glad I had, a nice sort of grounding early experience in that analog world, right? Before, and then, there's so many benefits of the digital world. I mean, it's amazing. I could get off here and I can lay down a song in a few minutes and all it takes, and multi-track it and all that stuff. And that's all really cool. But there was also something cool about living in that lo-fi world.
Yeah. Just
I
listen
mean,
to. Oh, go ahead. No, yeah, tuning in the radio and stuff.
Yeah, just those magical memories that you have. And so I feel very lucky, I got to see that in New York and see it change. But my biggest regret is I think about all those guitars that nobody wanted in those used places that could have gotten. I could have gotten like a Les Paul Jr. That's why Johnny Thunders got them. You could get a Les Paul Jr. for like less than $100.
Yeah,
no one wanted it. No one wanted it.
Nice.
Now you can't even touch one of those things less than like $5,000, $3,000. And you're thinking like, I wish I'd known. I wish I'd been more savvy back then, and collected a few vintage, because vintage wasn't cool. I remember when I was first getting into guitar, that's when BC Rich was big. Right, people wanted those gaudy BC Riches.
Yeah, with the pointy headstock or whatever.
Yeah, the ESPs, with no headstock, whatever those were, And active pickups were coming in and all that junk, and you could get all these great guitars that people now, have collections in their homes of for nothing. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah. Well, hey, man, I want to really thank you for coming on board and hanging out with me and chit-chatting, man.
Nick, this is so much fun. I knew it was going to be a blast. You're such an amazing guy, and I love talking to you about music. And this flew by. Thanks.
And I've mentioned it before to you a while back, but the first time that I really got to see you as an actor, know you as an actor, and I think I told you, was Memphis Belle.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
In 91, was it 90?
Exactly. Yeah. 91,
and then I took my father, who was aviation. He was a Marine aviator. Yeah. And he really enjoyed the show. He really enjoyed it. He came out of that going, I could look over and see him, because he always was on, those old World War II guys watching war movies. They're going, oh, this and that. But he was, as an aviation guy, he came out of that show affected. It was something for him to see. We talked a lot about it. So I may have mentioned that to you before, but I love that story. I know you're doing a lot of different things. Is there anything coming up that you care to tell anyone about, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, right now, what I've got the last season of 13 Reasons Why, and right now I'm working on Bosch. I'll be doing the final season of Bosch, and I just finished they've rebooted the show Leverage, so I did their first few episodes, and it's been good. It's been working after sitting in quarantine for 5 months, which I enjoy. But
nice
to be back at work.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
It's good to be back, man. This is such a blast. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
I loved every second of it. Thanks, man.
And then hopefully again, when things are, when the air raid siren clears and we all get to have our lives back, and we do a show down in the wine country, and you're in town, come down and hang out and just enjoy the day with us, because it's relaxing, fun,
Yeah, well, I've done a deep dive in a lot of your live videos, so I definitely want to see you in person.
Yeah, we have fun. It'll be a blast. So.
Definitely.
But I'll post all the different things you got cooking, and I'm glad you're back to work and Hollywood's getting going. We'll just keep trucking, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, Reed, thanks you so much for chatting. I appreciate it, man. Stay safe out there.
All right, rock on.
Okay, brother. Bye-bye.